Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Teaching and Learning Room. All day in this room, we'll be celebrating teaching and learning with AI. I'm Margot Johnson, so I'll help host this room along with Mackenzie Donovan from the AI Squared Center. And I'd like to start today with a wonderful panel. I'm so excited to get the privilege of moderating this panel. This panel is called Guardrails, Not Gotcha: Ethics, Policy, and Practices that Support Real Learning. My panelists today, and I'm just going in the order that we'll present in. So we have people that make policy at the institutional level, people that are on committees across departments or multiple colleges, and then people that teach directly in the classroom. And so first I'd like to introduce Christian Moriarty. Dr. Moriarty is a professor of ethics and law at St. Petersburg College. He's a leading nice. He brought his own cheering group. He's a consultant on ethical and legal implications of artificial intelligence. He's currently pursuing an Ed.D. in higher education policy at Florida State University, where his research focuses on developing robust institutional frameworks for academic integrity in the age of AI. Christian's work has had a significant international reach. He served as a guest professor at Riga Technical University in Latvia and has consulted on AI policy for the Parliamentary Confederation of the Americas. Domestically, he's been sought by institutions such as Harvard and Yale as the Ethics and Governance Chair for Falcon, which is our Florida State Consortium for AI, and a director for the International Center for Academic Integrity. He's at the forefront of research and policy development, helping institutions globally navigate the complexities of AI governance. Next up, I have Lyndsay Munro, who also has a cheering section. Lyndsay Munro is a teaching professor and faculty liaison for academic standards at the University of Nevada, Reno, which is a land-grant institution. We have a lot of representation from land-grant here at this conference. Her work focuses on supporting educators and institutions in integrating generative AI into courses, programs, and policies with an emphasis on course-specific design, clear guardrails, and instructional intent. And finally, I have Daniel Rottig. Daniel Rottig, is a professor in global strategic management and AI fellow at Florida Gulf Coast University's Human-Centered AI and Data Science Institute, where his work focuses on human-centered, value-driven applications of artificial intelligence in education and strategic decision-making. He's completed advanced AI training through Stanford, MIT CSAIL, Google, and Microsoft, and actively integrates AI tools and frameworks into his teaching and research across global contexts. A recipient of FGCU's highest honors in teaching, scholarship, and global engagement, Daniel brings both practical classroom experience and institutional perspectives to the critical conversation around AI ethics, responsible policy, and meaningful learning outcomes. So join me in welcoming the panel. So we're going to start with panelists giving brief presentations that show their viewpoints and perspectives on this topic of AI ethics at both the institutional and classroom levels.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate y'all being here. Do we have slides?
We do, and we also do have this QR code where you can ask any questions of the panelists. We'll keep this up throughout the sessions, and so if you have questions along the way, you can note them there. You can also like questions that are good for you, and we'll try to ask those first.
Do I want to stand? Yes, I want to stand. Well, thank you all very much for being here. I appreciate it, all of you. Right now, when I was making this PowerPoint, I'm recognizing how giant these screens are, and I'm really appreciative that I resisted my latent narcissism and didn't put my face on it. This is the moment that all my friends have all been waiting for. I am a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. None of this should be construed as legal advice. Sorry, I have to say that because of my license. That being said, my rates are extremely reasonable. Let's talk. Like any good philosophy professor, I have a whole lot of questions, but not nearly enough answers. And I think that's okay right now. Artificial intelligence and governance and teaching is something that is a moving target. Sometimes it feels like we're grasping at smoke. But that's why this is so important for us to discuss and for us to have this conversation. So one thing that I want to particularly put in all of our minds is, what does the degree certify now? Traditionally, the degree is supposed to certify not just that you went to school, but you proved that you learned something from that school and that you have the skills and abilities that went along with it. Now we're looking at what one researcher says is a bifurcation of teaching and assessment. Is that I think teaching and where we are right now is alive and well, even online. I just read an article this morning about how someone effectively taught themselves through MIT's open resources and became a giant in the realm of AI, even though they never actually attended MIT. That being said, where can our employers or licensing boards and anybody else verify through a degree whether they actually can learn those things? We see now that tons of employers have to do their own skills-based assessment to make sure that not only do you have the degree, but do you actually know what you're doing. I remember when I first got after my bachelor's degree, my first big boy job is that after I did and this was 25 years ago, after the regular interview, they sat me in front of a computer and said, write me a letter about why you deserve this job, and you have 30 minutes to do it. And if they were doing that 25 years ago, can you imagine what it's looking like right now to these employers? I think a lot of people say it's like, well, if they do something with AI and they seem to learn something and it's okay, then what difference does it make? And I think one of the answers to that is some of the professions that you see here, nursing, law, and engineering, is that these people need to be able to have skills off the top of their heads. Do you really want us to be living in a world where your nurse at your bedside isn't sure how much potassium is supposed to be in their body and they pull out ChatGPT to look it up? So we need to actually verify those skills, and we need to question whether our schools are indeed doing that. So we're also looking at a huge equity gap, is that Cal State paid $17 million a year for their students to have access to institutional level AI. I come from a community college. I don't know about y'all. $17 million, I think, is like, my vice president is here. Is that like 20% of our entire budget? That is a ton of money that the haves can use, but the have-nots, not so much. 58% of students report insufficient AI knowledge, and 36% have received any kind of formal AI training. So then we say, why are they cheating? Why are they using it inappropriately? Why are they doing things that might be hurtful to the genuine learning? And I think the answer is that, well, we're not teaching them how to use it appropriately. So what I think we're going to be looking at is a significant AI literacy gap. If AI is the future of employment, how much are we actually teaching it in our schools, and who's learning it and who isn't? So we can see that when we get to like detection orientation, are they actually doing the thing that you're trying to do? And there's such a varying amount of discussion to be had here. I got into the most vicious of LinkedIn arguments last week, and as you all know, LinkedIn arguments are the most vicious. In that the discussion of detection and whether it's actually effective and if it's even fair. We're seeing that if you're familiar with the Newbie versus a Delphi case, a Delphi Academy accused a student of using AI inappropriately, and then it wounded its way through the court system in New York, and a Delphi Academy was found to not following their own process, and therefore was held against them. This is a significant new step in the jurisprudence of American higher education, is that we need to make sure that we're following our steps. But then there's people that say, does detection even work to begin with? It shifts the burden of proof onto students, and as one of my colleagues put it, it's effectively like a tarot deck, using that to determine if they actually, quote unquote, cheated or not. I know with my own students, Grammarly activates it. And so does that mean that they cheated or not? And even if they did, how can you truly prove it? So what we're looking at right now is that some of the advents in dealing with artificial intelligence is process-based learning, which my colleague talked about yesterday, and they're going to talk about more, and so my colleagues up here will. And that is right. We need more process-based. But I'd also say that that's not enough, is that premium AI can now fake process. Premium AI can fake a video of your student taking an exam. Premium AI you can point it at a Canvas screen and it will completely do all of the assignments without any interpretation, without any requirement of the students actually engaging with it. And so we now have a literacy divide, again, of have and have-nots. Not those that are cheating and those that don't cheat, but people that know how to use AI and those that don't. I think the answer to that, of course, is AI literacy in our schools and providing them that AI, but that also means that it's incredibly expensive, and do we have the time and wherewithal to do that? So my last piece, I promise I'm almost done, is that what higher education owes the future is for us to be conscious about governance in this and develop real policy and educate our staff and our faculty in what it means and how to be fair about it. There's not a perfect answer to any of this. No, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all policy at the institutional level, at the class level, even the per-assessment level. I think there's different levels of policy that might be to that. But if we don't start making these decisions now, they're going to be made for us. Particularly the federal government is looking a lot at this right now. At least in the state of Florida, they punted on it for now. But if we continue to be blasé on this, I think these decisions are going to be made for us, and we're not going to like what those decisions are. And so with that, the lawyer up here talking first to scare you is now over, and my much more inspirational colleagues will be happy to inspire you.
Or do you want? Oh, okay. How do you follow that, right? Just joking.
Always the best compliment.
Yeah. I echo my colleague here in welcoming you all, and thank you for being here to talk about this very important conversation that seems to be a conversation that we have a lot, right? And so a lot of my work takes place in the classroom. I teach up to 1,500 students every semester for the last 13 years. I'm actually a chemist, not anywhere close to being a lawyer, so I won't be your lawyer, that's for sure. But I want to talk a little bit today about just thinking about pedagogical guardrails, okay? So on the front of at the curriculum and the instructional level, which I think is the first and most critical place, right, where we're reaching our students and thinking about and talking about AI. And so specifically, my focus is designing for learning in the age of AI. And so we all have this challenge. We're all in the same boat regardless of our discipline. We want our students, right, we use the word learning a lot, right? And the panel is, having these guardrails for real learning. And so I think we need to take a moment and think about what does that even mean, right? So what is learning? What is this real learning that we're all desiring of our students? Okay, and so just kind of from my viewpoint here, and yours may look a little bit different, but these are human skills that we're trying to identify, right? Thinking is a human skill, right? Not an AI skill. We want them to think, not just produce. We want them to practice, iterate, right? Get feedback and give feedback. We want them to make decisions, right? And we talk about this thought process, this thoughtful engagement that we want as our students are working through our classrooms, and exercising judgment. And then explaining reasoning, right? So again, these are all human skills, human tasks, right? So the AI is really good at outputting a product, right? But they can't judge. Pet peeve of mine is when people will say that LLMs can judge something. That's a human skill. LLMs are not judging anything. There's no judgment there, right? They're not thinking. They're not making decisions. They're not reasoning, right? These are human skills that are important with respect to our learning. And so how do we create this environment, or what might this environment look like in our classrooms to promote this learning? right? And, again, so I'm, one of the roles that I have in my institution is I'm faculty liaison for academic standards, right? That's a really heavy role right now, right? Especially with the AI front, okay? And I have a lot of conversations around surveilling students. And my perspective on this is we need to really shift our thought process if we want real learning to happen in our classrooms. And instead of thinking about how do we catch our students, it's how do we guide their learning, right? Instead of which monitoring tools can we use to catch our students, right? Thinking about our pedagogy, what techniques are we using in our classrooms to support this learning environment that we want them to have? Right? And a lot of times, the root cause isn't the AI. It's really not about the technology, right? It's about the teaching. It's about how we're engaging with our students, right? Technology is not new to us, right? And we're just adapting to our pedagogically, we need to adapt to what we're seeing, right? And this last one is a hill I will die on, is instead of instilling fear in our students, right? If you are using AI and you're not supposed to, this is what's going to happen to you, which is what I hear a lot, more than I'd like to. I'd like to hear it never, really, is here is why you need to take responsibility for what your output is. Here is why we need to think about the ethics and the responsible use of these tools and including our students in these conversations, okay? And so for me, these guardrails are about guidance, right? Guardrails are assuming that our students want to learn, they just need help and guidance in what that looks like, right? Gotchas are control and fear. Gotchas are assuming students are there to cheat, assuming students want to take the shortcut. Okay, and I believe firsthand from engaging with thousands of students, that is not the majority of our students. I think we need to give our students a lot more credit than sometimes we do. So I want to share 3 practices that might be useful just to think about how do we take these, this framework or these ideas, these principles, and we put them into practice in our classrooms, right? And so there's three kind of main ones that I'd like to share. The first is designed for process, not just product, okay? And so a lot of the times, I actually am really excited about AI because it is forcing us to really rethink our practices, what maybe hasn't been working for a long time that we, is now kind of being shone a light on that. And, we really want students to show their thinking, show their reasoning, right? And so we can design our assessments, our activities around that process now and no longer just a product, right? And separating practice spaces from performance spaces, right? I believe if you ask a student to produce a product outside of the classroom, you just need to assume that they're going to use AI, okay? Just make that assumption, right? But you should be peppering in other types of assessment, other types of ways within the classroom that students can show their learning and show their thought process. And then valuing explanation over polish. Okay. The second one is being explicit about the purpose, not just permission, okay? Instead of just saying AI is allowed or not allowed, which is a lot of the starting point for a lot of people when they're trying to think about what they should be talking to their students, emphasizing this task is about whatever, X kind of thinking, right? So we can't use it here because this, right? Or AI can help here because of this, right? And even further, AI doesn't help here. Like, why can't we use AI here? Instead of just saying, you can't use AI, no AI in my class, right? Students aren't understanding your rationale for that or your reasoning, right? And maybe, it's a good opportunity for us to think, what is our rationale and our reasoning for that, right? And so really keeping them in that conversation. And then shifting from surveillance to conversation about AI. So bringing it into the open, okay? Normalizing questions about AI. I have faculty, or I like to say, it's like people don't want to talk about AI with their students because they're afraid their students are going to now use AI, right? It's like, I don't want to talk about sex because then my kids are going to have sex, right? Right? That's not the way to approach this, right? And so normalizing those conversations, normalizing the uncertainty not only the students have, but we as faculty have. It's okay that we don't have the answers, right? And we can navigate this landscape together with our students, right? Bringing them in that conversation. And my experience has been, right, if we are just putting, surveillance on them, we're not stopping AI use. We're just taking it underground, right? They're not going to stop using it. They're just going to use it in ways that are not responsible and ethical instead of us allowing to guide that use, okay? And so just kind of a last point here is fear-based language, right? Surveillance, right? I'm going to charge you with X, Y, or Z, you're going to get a 0, right? Things like that. That's just driving AI underground, right? And learning-based language brings it into the open and gives us an opportunity to guide our students, okay? And one of the last things that I will just mention is I feel very strongly that it is, if we are not there to teach our students ethical and responsible use, nobody will. There's nobody else to do it, right? The messages they're seeing, the Super Bowl, over a third of the commercials were AI, okay? And not one of them used the word ethics or responsible use, right? And so this is an opportunity for us to shape that use, right? By really bringing it out into the forefront. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lyndsay, Christian, for your talks, and thank you, Margot, for organizing the session. We actually had a very nice session via Zoom last week to coordinate our talk, and this catchy title is actually developed by Christian, so we followed the opinion of our lawyer to go with this title. So, and I'm glad that many of you are here, hopefully because of what we say, not just because of the title. But let me... What's that? Our lawyer, a lawyer, but he became our lawyer, right?
We hired him.
We hired him. He works pro bono for us. Okay.
You wish.
So let me start with a question. How many of you have ever used GPS to get somewhere, and then you later found out that you had absolutely no idea how you got there? Okay? And you couldn't retrace the route. You don't remember the landmarks on the way. You just arrived. Maybe some of you felt this way when you arrived at this conference if you drove here, right? Now imagine this. You take the same route, and GPS is not just guiding you, it's actually driving a car for you. You also will arrive, maybe faster, maybe smoother, maybe less stressful, depending on your driving habits, right? But at no point in time, and that's the problem, have you learned how to navigate. And I think that's where we are with AI in higher education, that our students now can arrive at answers, they can arrive at insights, they even arrive at polished outputs, but they never had the opportunity to learn the underlying capabilities, or I guess as our colleagues from Broward say, durable skills. I don't know if you went to the session yesterday. So when we ask the questions as educators, did you use AI? We focus on the tool. We're asking the wrong question. The right question to ask is, what do we want our students to learn? Do our courses want them to build the map? You remember the old days with the map without GPS? You actually had to go and find your way.
That was awful.
So if what we want our students to learn is actually navigating, then our job as educators is not to police them. Our job is to create environments where they actually use the tool, but at the same time learn the underlying skills we want them to learn and understand when to use the tool and when the tool is inhibiting their learning. So if you think about our title, thank you, lawyer,
Is that my name?
Guardrails guardrails versus gotchas, think about this, that gotchas is the police, which is hiding cameras behind the trees, right? They're reactive. They're responding to failure, right? Guardrails is policy, which is preventing wrong behavior, right? It's guiding us into the right direction. And that's why I believe it is so important to think about what we want our students to learn in the first place, rather than just being reactive and trying to police them using all the gotchas we have. I just want to give a shout out to a colleague of mine who unfortunately couldn't be here, Ahmed Elshal, who's also an AI fellow at my university. He's actually an engineering faculty. I'm in the business school. So we talked about this together. And when we conceptualized our talk, we thought about 3 uncomfortable realities we face. And I've seen this throughout this conference. I've seen this yesterday in all those wonderful sessions, that there are 3 uncomfortable realities, I think, which are being shared by many of you. Number 1, it's the faculty, right? That there's a lack of guidance. There's oftentimes the feeling of being by yourself. How do I deal with AI? How do I deal with the students? How do I, those faculty who believe we need to police our students, how do I properly police them and identify whether they did something wrong, okay? How do I stay ahead of my students, right? There's also the uncomfortable reality among students that there's a lack of clarity. By the way, students, I don't think that they don't like rules. I think students don't like arbitrary rules, rules which are not clear to them. Right? As long as we're clear and we give them a clear guidance, I think they will follow the rules. And that's why I think guardrails are so important, because they basically provide a roadmap instead of just hiding cameras or trying to police them. Right? They're clearing the lanes, they're putting clear signage up, right? They're making sure that students know where to go and how to get there. Right? So that's another reality. And then we have that institutional situation that oftentimes we see that with our institutions of higher education who are not providing the frameworks necessary for both students and faculty to have a very consistent way of implementing AI, of following whether AI is used properly. And I think bringing those 3 uncomfortable realities together is part of the solution. My colleague who I just mentioned recently published a framework based on Bloom's taxonomy, which I found very interesting when looking at it. And we always try to find acronyms in academia to teach things more easily. So there's a FACT acronym, even though it's not in the right order. So if you see the F and the T and the C and the T, it actually spells FACT, even though the letters are not in order. But if you think about Bloom's taxonomy here, we thought about, why don't we look at our courses? And first of all, define what do we want students to learn? And that answer to that question, what we want them to learn, has nothing to do with AI, right? Has nothing to do with it. Even though I know our wonderful keynote speaker today talked about AI-ready workforce, yeah, to some extent, we want students to learn those durable skills which are related to using AI in the right way. But in general, what are the underlying skills we want our students to know? Critical thinking, lifelong learning, okay? Being able to solve problems, ethical judgments. These things have been there before AI. Maybe AI can help us a little better with this, but the underlying skills have always been there. So what do we want them to learn? So if you go up from the bottom up in this pyramid, you see remember and understand. So these are those conceptual skills, this conceptual knowledge students should know. And I hear that calculator analogy a lot when talking about AI, even here at the conference, that we want students to know basic algebra, basic arithmetics, right? 1 + 1 is 2. Right? 3 times 17 is not 500. Right? Students should have that kind of smell test saying, no, that doesn't sound right, that answer. Right? Even if they don't know the correct answer, at least they can eliminate answers which just don't sound right. Right? So those remembering and understanding those fundamental conceptual skills, they should know without using any tools, whether it's a calculator or a GPS or an AI tool. And as we move up in this Bloom's taxonomy and we go to apply and analyze, yes, we might want to use some limited AI here in order to help students to better analyze, to better apply what they've learned. And then as we go up to the top of this pyramid, right, where we have the nicest view, to evaluate and create, to be innovative, let AI go free, as long as we taught students how to use it in the right way. Use them as a study buddy, use it as a creative partner to conceptualize idea, to create, to evaluate, to innovate. but have them do it in the right way. So we looked at this from this perspective using Bloom's taxonomy to kind of put a framework around it, how that fact framework, is being established. Now, the task for us as educators now is, how do we set our assignments? There are different types of assignments for each of those steps you see in Bloom's taxonomy. Right? For those lower level ones for which we don't want students to use AI, of course we have to design proper assessment techniques to see whether they actually understand what we want them to understand and they know what we want them to know, and do so without having help using AI tools to tell them what the right answer is. And I think this is a big challenge in education. I remember just a few years ago, everyone said, let's go away from multiple choice and go to essay exams. We want students to write. Well, you know what happened with essay exams, right? They write it within 1/10 of a second now because they pre-programmed the prompt. It's just how quickly they can hit the button. And there's the essay exam. And that's very hard to police, of course, right? And I don't know if you've noticed this, but my students, they write so beautifully now. It's unbelievable. In October of 2022, I saw horrible essays, and starting in November, they're so beautiful. Poets, they must have read a lot over the Christmas break, right? When January 23 came around, they were all the perfect writers, right? And so the idea is those multiple choice exams still do have a purpose in my understanding. I don't like them too much. I was born and raised in Germany where that concept doesn't even exist. Right? I learned it when moving to the US. I said, what is this? This sounds right and this sounds right, and I think I could argue this is also a right answer. Right? This all essay over there. 3-hour essay is handwritten, okay, in that educational system where I grew up. But the idea is that it still has a purpose, in my opinion, especially for larger classes, because it's very hard to have an oral exam with, and I've seen some of you yesterday, I think Jacob from University of Florida, 1,000 students in his foundational AI course. It's very hard if you think about this. So there needs to be a proper assessment technique. But as you move up to create and evaluate and you allow students to use AI, we also have to think about creative assessment techniques for students to use. Now, I just, running out of time, share one assessment I use. In my global strategy class, which is a senior level core class in our international business program, I have my students work with a local company on a semester-long internationalization project. So I have my students interact with the president and the CEOs and the C-suite executives. They come to campus 4 times a semester to sit there and evaluate students' presentations. They also read their reports. We have the first session, they come in, they give a company overview, then we have a Shark Tank type pitch, so that my students have to pitch ideas to the executives and they rate them, whether it's yay, no, or maybe think about it. And then they have to do presentations over the course of the semester. We also have company visits and Zoom calls with the executives to get feedback. Now, they can use all the AI tools in the world, and I encourage them to do it, to do a better project, to do a better country analysis, to inform their internationalization decisions, right, to get data, to analyze data. But once they show up in front of the executives in the classroom, they don't have their phone and ChatGPT on it when they present. They got to think on their feet, and they have to impress the executives. And what I also do with the companies, they have to give me at least one internship position. Most companies do more than that, and then likely leading to a job position for the best student in class. So we give them an incentive, we give them the roadmap of where they can go, but still having them use the tools in order to think better, to augment, to amplify their own thinking and their own decision making. And I know, Margot, I think out of time, but so this wasn't a gist, what we're doing, and I look forward to discussing this a little more in our Q&A round. So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. So we have a couple moderated panel questions, one that's a little bit more theoretical and one that's a little bit more concrete. I know Daniel is headed into talking about concrete examples of how this is playing out in his classroom, which were really interesting of how you blend with experiential learning. So I think I'm going to skip to the concrete question first of our panel. It was beautiful to hear about like this paradigm shift and how we're thinking about learning more than monitoring. We're thinking about, how students will actually use AI and how will that translate into their practices in the future. But what does that look like? What does meaningful AI guidance, what does meaningful AI policy actually look like for faculty or students at your institution, and how are you operationalizing AI guidance? I'm going to ask Christian first.
So this is a multi-step, multi-pronged process that all stakeholders need to be involved in. So our overarching policy of academic integrity, thinking about what does it mean, what is plagiarism, what is inappropriate AI use, but also being expansive enough to allow individual courses, individual instructors, and individual assessments even, being able to assess what, how, and whether they use artificial intelligence in their classrooms and their exams and what have you. I know I was speaking to my English as a second language colleagues, where AI is really not wanted at all, because they need to be able to speak and they need to be able to write in a language that they weren't born into. I know my programming colleagues say, you better believe I need AI. If I don't teach them how to use AI, then they're not getting a job. And I think there's everywhere in between. Academic freedom requires us to be able to allow the instructors to have the expertise to be able to develop those processes and procedures together, and getting students involved in that as well. I know I start my semesters talking to my students, what policies and procedures in AI do you think are relevant here? And we vote on them and we decide them together as a class. By no means are any of these strategies perfect, but these strategies are necessary in order to balance and strike that balance between over-policing and developing those genuine guardrails for what is useful and not. It's really a moving target. It's going to continue to be a moving target. And I think faculty, for better or for worse, a lot of them are also like, well, I'm a physicist. Now I have to learn AI on top of all of that. And the answer is, I think, is somewhere in between, is that you don't need to know what a token is. You don't need to know a probabilistic determination of next token or whatever. But we do need to know, what does AI mean in our classrooms, and I think that's incumbent upon institutions to teach our faculty and have them engaged in the process of what that policy direction means and how to make better decisions.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Sure, I can speak on this. At the classroom level, engaging with our students directly, to me, meaningful AI guidance is when you're helping people make good decisions, not just follow rules. And so with respect to like a critical starting point would be an AI assessment scale, right? So right out of the gate, so your students know your position on a certain assignments or assessments around AI, and not framing it AI as negative or positive, right? It just is. It's not good or bad. It just is what it is, right? And really highlighting the ethics and integrity part. So a lot of the conversations with my students, and when I'm teaching them about AI, my goal is not to tell them, right, what not to do. It's to help them think about what they should do, right? And because there's such a gray area there, so talking about things like, where does this information come from, right? What biases or hallucinations, right, misinformation is in this? Where might this help our learning? Where might this hinder our learning, right? So having those very specific conversations with our students is a great jumping off point for that AI guidance and helping them navigate that within your classroom and then other classrooms as well.
Daniel, how have you been operationalizing AI guidance in your course?
This works. Does this work?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I just want to add to what Christian and Lyndsay said, but let me start with an anecdote here, which I found out a little more than a year ago, and I thought it was anecdotal, but when talking to colleagues, I found it's maybe more systematic than I thought, that those students who don't know much about AI are those who use it most in the wrong way, and when they're being caught, they're the ones who are the loudest saying, I didn't use it, right? And when looking at all those AI detection tools, you might know about them, copy leaks, and I know our Turnitin team, I saw a desk out there. You see those students who have 100% AI detection, but they're the loudest coming and saying, no, I did not use this, I'm an honest person. So I think AI literacy is the only way to make those students understand that they should use the tool, but use it in the right way. And that's what those guardrails are about, right? Guardrails, this is policy which is preventing misconduct, which is telling students a clear guidance of here is what you should and should not do. So when is AI allowed? when it is only allowed in a limited way and when it should not be allowed, and tell them why, right? I have a 16-month-old daughter who's now running around like crazy and speaks several languages, and I try to tell her things. No, well, there's one language I don't understand, but which is baby gibberish. But when I tell her no, she continues what she does. I have to tell her at least try to, why. Certain things should or should not happen, right? And this is what I do with the students, using that GPS metaphor I used earlier. It's almost like the GPS. If we want students to learn how to navigate, we should not ban the use of the GPS, right? It has clear advantages, but we should also tell students that they should not overly rely on the GPS, otherwise they will drive off the cliff. And I don't know if you remember that story when GPS came out. Actually, in my home country, unfortunately, a BMW drove into the water. Because a 5 Series BMW driver just looked at the GPS, was so excited, and then the car steered into the water. And that's what we need to tell our students, to take their focus away from short-term gain of saying you can manipulate certain assignments. And we know there's never a foolproof way for students not to kind of game the system. If an assignment, by the way, can be hacked by AI, can be answered by AI, I don't think AI broke the assignment. I think they exposed it, that it's the wrong assignment, right? It's not an enforcement issue, it's a design issue. We have to design better assignments for students to actually think and solve those assignments. As I said, the practical project I have in my classes in front of executives, there's basically no way for them in front of executives presenting in a room to use AI and try to game this presentation. They need to know what they research in order to give answers to executives when they ask them. And that is a real-world preparation for our students. That's what they're going to face later on. And by focusing them on that goal, on the destination they want to go, rather than just on those milestones and saying, hey, if you want to get to this goal, instead of telling them, don't use AI, which is scaring them, they would hide, they would try to game the system, I tell them, you better use AI, otherwise you will not learn. And that catches their attention. But use it in the right way, and if you want to go where you want to go, you need AI, but you need to use it in the right way. And that's, I found, at least for most of the students, they understand that message.
Yeah. So we've gone from kind of like more abstract and reframing this issue to the more concrete. I want to go even more concrete and talk a little bit about AI governance on your campuses. So Christian, could you talk to us about how you actually shape AI governance at your college level? And what are like some of the challenges and successes? What happened in the room when you were actually moving this forward? Because there's lots of us that want to do that.
Yeah. Well, I'm really proud of our institution's efforts on this. It's been difficult. We clearly don't have any money. We're doing this for the funsies sometimes. But some of the folks that are on the team are here and that help develop this policies and procedures. By no means is anything we have silver bullets, but something that we developed as an institution was the stoplight analogy of AI implementation. So we have simple syllabus, and we enabled our faculty to choose from a policy or develop their own policy on how AI gets integrated into their own institution, their own courses, their own assessments. What we're seeing, of course, is that that's not perfect itself. Students don't always understand it. The faculty members may have forgotten to choose one, and because they're busy and they have a lot of other stuff going on. But being able to have that academic freedom while giving them the guardrails to be able to enable themselves has been moderately successful.
Yeah, thank you so much. Going from the institution-wide level to the classroom level, Lyndsay and Daniel, when you think about those challenges and successes with your own students, and I know Daniel shared an anecdote, how do you talk to students about AI in ways that emphasize that responsibility that Lyndsay was talking about earlier? What do those conversations look like in your classroom, and what language has worked and what has failed? We can learn just as much iteratively from our failures.
Okay, so I've had, in my experience, this trust-based kind of policy is involving our students in the policy in our classroom instead of telling them explicitly necessarily what is allowed and what isn't allowed. We open up with a conversation around what they think might be considered responsible use, what they think might be considered not responsible use based on some of the context of our course. And when students are involved in that conversation and that decision-making, I have found that I'm currently teaching a class where I haven't seen a single, and it's a writing class, I haven't seen a single deviation from the policy that we generated together, and understanding why we chose that policy and in certain ways. And obviously they're not driving the bus, but they're on the bus with me, right? And they're able to express those as well. Making sure that it's grounded in learning and explaining to our students why we're making certain choices, right? I've had several conversations about how we're in an age where it's almost like there's a need to explain our pedagogical approaches to our students for the first time in teaching, right? So they understand why they're being asked to do certain things. And in my experience, when we do that, when we explain to them why here we're not going to allow it, but here we'd like to explore it and how, they're going to follow those policies and be on board with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that ability to shape the policy. Christian, could you talk a little bit about how does a policy evolve? Like if a policy is written that maybe chafes with the reality these are emerging technologies, the affordances and constraints. Right now we're thinking a lot about generative AI, but in the future we'll have a lot of wearables. Yeah. There's already the emergence of these wearables. How do we think about how policy should evolve naturally to better serve people?
So this is probably like the one real trick, particularly right now. Something that when I do consulting for policy, I always recommend to have a specific iterative process and schedule, that on a schedule that you would update the policy, but then also you need different policy levels. You have an overarching policy, which is purposefully to be relatively stable. And you want that to be stable so people understand it over time and being able to interpret it effectively and know what that's going on with that. As you all know, you send out a new policy, how many of your colleagues actually read that email? And the answer is like 5%, right? But you develop that over time and you keep educating on people on the overarching policy, you get more buy-in on it. Well, at our institution, we did a roadshow where we developed a new policy and we went to every stakeholder group to not just send them email, but to get them involved. But you also need layers to go along with it. So you need procedure below your policy that can be implemented more often and becomes an interpretive kind of contract where you are able to move at a faster pace when things like that happen. And so once you get that iterative process along with the flexibility where you need it and the consistency where you can strike the balance that comes between justice and consistency. Christian Moriarty, 2022, look me up.
I'm going to move to the audience questions. Our panelists can see your questions on the screen in front of them. So please feel free to add more questions and vote up ones that you definitely want asked. I'm going to start with you, Daniel, and the question that's received a lot of votes here is about online and asynchronous classrooms. So what are your thoughts on the future of online asynchronous courses and degrees in an AI era? And I'll give you a moment to think.
Yeah,
because I know.
How much time do we have? I think it is very important for us to think about different course delivery formats and different types of learning methods we're going to use and different types of assessments, clearly. So what I just mentioned, this class project I have in front of executives is possibly not available or maybe not available in the same way using an online environment. I could possibly have a synchronous Zoom call with executives. I might have my students record video presentations rather than do it in person, which could be AI generated, that they use a digital twin and just have them present, and it's probably very hard for us to detect whether it's actually them or whether it's a digital twin talking. But if they are so creative to do that, there's also some learning in there. Right? So that students actually learn something by going through the process of generating content and generating a digital twin and trying to program it in a way to make a presentation. So I think we have to really think about how different course delivery formats have an effect on the underlying conditions of what we want, which is students to learn. And that brings me back to the guardrail idea. When every time we talk about guardrails, or oftentimes, we think about protecting ourselves from the wrong issues. We're protecting ourselves from unfairness, or we're protecting ourselves from students conducting the wrong behavior. But I believe what guardrails really protect is the underlying condition where learning happens. Cognitive effort, so that students really have to think in today's age of AI, instead of just shortcutting it. Skill development, I know this is a big theme at this conference, those durable skills, or as our keynoter this morning said, work-ready skills, so that we really want that underlying condition of skill development. And then we want judgment, which is also coming out of many presentations, the judgment of, number one, when to use AI tools and when does it really inhibit thinking, and how to use it in the right way, bringing that ethical perspective into our discussion. And we have to think about different course delivery formats and see how can we create those underlying conditions of learning that students still think and go through a cognitive effort, that they really develop the skills we want them to develop, and that they really make good judgments and impart this in different ways. I do not believe online will go away. I think it has a clear purpose. But I believe that there will probably be a concentration in that industry, because if you think about this, and we're all from relatively small regional schools, I'm down in Southwest Florida. If we have a beautiful campus, and I invite everyone to visit, and the next school is 2 hours away. It's Miami, Florida International University, Miami, you name it, Florida Atlantic, we have Orlando, and we have Tampa. So as far as our campus is concerned, we have basically a 2-hour regional protection because we're the only major university in our area, which is fast growing. But when you think about our online programs, the entire US, or the entire world, if you will, top business schools are our competition, if you think about this. So I believe in online education, there will probably be a concentration in the industry, and that schools really distinguish themselves by having that face-to-face or at least hybrid type of format, which requires some students to come to campus in person. And that, of course, opens up opportunities for some of those assessments we talked about. So.
Thank you, Daniel. We probably have time for one or two more. I'm going to combine two of the questions here because I see that they're related. So we have someone asking about practical assessment strategies, and could we combine that one with this idea of how do we make grading and feedback scalable? Maybe for Lyndsay, I'm thinking about your emphasis on process, which makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But if we're emphasizing process and we're having many more milestones for check-in, how do we address grading, and how do we practically think about assessment?
With respect to the point about tripling or quadrupling submissions, that is not the case when I think about process over product. So instead of having, I would receive the same number of submissions for a course, but I am receiving a different type of submission for the course. And so to give you kind of an example, I'm teaching a seminar writing course right now. And instead of getting a final seminar summary, I'm encouraging students to show listening sheets and listening, right? So I want to know their thinking. I want to know their thought process, how they're engaging with the seminar, right? That's the point of my course. So going back to my learning objectives for what that course is meant to achieve, it's not for them to become this isn't a publication writing course. This is for them to engage for my learning goals with the seminar and the seminar speaker. And so my focus shifts from what used to be a product of a summary, a standard summary that they kind of just formulated anyways. I didn't see a lot of value in that, to, okay, I want them to show me their thinking as they're engaging with the summary. And so for me, it's not more assessments, it's just a different type of assessment. So going back to the core of that, the goals of that course, and me having to think, okay, what do I really want my students to know? Do I care if they're writing something, or do I care that they're thinking and learning how to be a scientist? And so shifting that focus for me has been where that has been impactful for courses like that.
So I want to thank our panelists. Our time is up, but thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for all your participation.